All right. Hello, everybody. We are NASA's Committee on the Status of Women, and it's wonderful to have this opportunity to connect with all of you tonight. After our presentation at the NASA Biennial Conference, we ran out of time to answer audience questions, and we know that on the committee itself, we can get carried away with so many rich and interesting conversations on questions that deal with gender advocacy and what we're trying to do on this committee for NASA and beyond. And so we're really delighted to have this opportunity tonight to speak to you all about some critical questions and also open the floor for you to ask us some pointed questions. So we're going to start with brief introductions before we start addressing our questions. I'm Connie Frigo. I am the co-chair of CSW, and I live in Athens, Georgia.
I'm Kim Loeffert. I'm also co-chair of CSW, and I live in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Hi, I'm Jan Barry Baker, and I am leader of the Women's Mentoring Program, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Hi, I'm Allison Balcetis, and I live in Edmonton, Alberta.
Hi, I'm Grace Gelpi, and I am a new member of the CSW, and I currently live in East Lansing, Michigan.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Hulting-Cohen, and I live in Amherst, Massachusetts, working on allyship.
I'm Carrie Koffman, and I am overseeing a community engagement that we'll talk about soon, a community engagement project initiative, and I live in Connecticut, right in the thick of it.
Hi, I'm Nicki Roman. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I am a new member of the CSW, and I couldn't be more excited. Before we begin, I want to mention that it would be great to hear from you. So if you have questions throughout the webinar, we would love you to send them in the chat, whether it be here on Zoom or if you're following along on Facebook Live. We are able to get to these questions throughout the webinar, and we'll also save some time at the end to cover these questions as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on over to Carrie.
Okay, so if you did happen to attend our session at the NASA conference, you got the initial introduction of this community engagement initiative. If not, it's outlined pretty clearly on our website. So I'd really like you to direct you there so you can go and check out what the details. But the short version is that when we held our CSW discussions at the regional conferences last year, the one point. Oops, you screen shared so I can't see my notes.
Oh.
Sorry. That's okay. I can go back. I actually know what they are, but just in case. Yes, when we had our regional conferences last year, the one point that was made in every single region was that girls don't have trouble beginning the saxophone, but that the dropout rate is significant and they don't continue to play the saxophone. And so we formed a community engagement initiative to address that with a project that I am super excited about because it's 100% inclusive. The gist of it is NASA has agreed to pay a $7,000 commissioning fee for a piece by Roshan Etazadi that will be for a professional soloist with middle school band. And the idea is meant to get as many musicians, saxophonists, into middle school band rooms to be role models. But the thing that makes it exclusive for us is that for what will now be the first 2.5 years, performances will be eligible only to women and non-binary NASA members. The second 2 years will be open for all genders. And the publicity gathered by that, putting role models into classrooms, is hopefully what will start to change those numbers. So we're hopeful that we'll have hundreds of performances. We need everybody's participation, please. And the dates have changed slightly because of COVID-19. We're still anticipating a fall completion date of the composition, but performances we are hoping, as of now, will be able to begin on January 1 instead of the fall. So that actually does extend our period of exclusivity just a bit more. And the additional information that will be posted on our website will be things like how you might be able to approach public school educators, how you can get a copy of a perusal score in advance to share with educators, and how we can track our performances. So that'll all be run through the website. And any other questions that come up in the meantime, please contact us. It's going to be really exciting.
Great. So I guess I will go next, unless somebody has questions regarding the community engagement program. I haven't seen any come up here. Nicki, is there anything?
Nope, not yet.
Okay. So the mentoring program had its first iteration last year, and we've made a few changes that we announced at the NASA conference, and that is to align the mentoring program with the academic year. We had a lot of requests both from mentees and mentors regarding that. So we have made that change, and we are right now working on retooling the mentoring program so that it becomes a much richer and much more meaningful program. Not that it wasn't meaningful this last iteration, but so that we can actually delve a little deeper into focused mentoring. And so we are working on that right now and pulling together an ad hoc committee that will be focused on sort of creating this next iteration that will begin in the fall. And so you can look for applications to be available or more information to be available this summer. The mentoring program will have a combination of these focused mentoring opportunities, as I mentioned, as well as a series of mentoring opportunities that will be open to the entire NASA community that will be about issues specific to women and the saxophone, but shared on a wider level. So sort of like these webinars that we're offering, and we'll be focusing on specific topics and having conversations that will benefit a large group of people. So the reason we're looking at something a little bit more focused like this is so that we can actually really create something that is specifically for the person being mentored. We can get much more specific in that way. And so that's the plan and the update on the mentoring program. And so, of course, we'll be sharing things, as Carrie mentioned, the website about that. So we'll also be announcing on our social media as well when those things are ready. But we are very much looking forward to the second year of the mentoring program.
Can't hear you, Kim.
Oh, Kim is muted.
There we go. I tried to unmute myself and it told me the host had muted me. So there we go. I'm good. No muting. All right. So I want us to start off the question, what are the main issues that CSW is addressing through its current initiatives? What's going on? What are we handling? And I want to start talking about that by just restating our mission statement for you all so that you can hear that. We put a lot of thought into that. And what it is that we want to be doing. So the Committee on the Status of Women promotes gender equity in areas related to saxophone, supports the professional development of women and gender non-binary members in the North American Saxophone Alliance, and serves as a repository of resources and information about Women Plus and saxophone. CSW serves the North American Saxophone Alliance in matters that are critical to all saxophonists. So some of the issues that we're addressing right now include lack of deliberate placement of gender representation, which includes things like the website, not the NASA website, not showing equal representation of gender, race, other things within its photos, which we noticed really is just a lack of NASA having photos to pull from, that there's no mechanism right now by which photos of conferences are taking place to make sure that our representation is there. So we want to make all members feel like they belong by seeing themselves in that website. And that's something that we started collecting photos at this last biennial in Phoenix, and we already have a great start, and hopefully that's something that can continue. In general, we're very interested in lack of deliberate placement of gender representation, or excuse me, access to visible time slots at conferences, and just general equal representation in all kind of the visible positions that NASA has. So that includes things like the executive committee, but also concerto soloists on evening concerts, who's giving master classes, things like that. We think that the percentage of women plus members in NASA, that should match the representation of concerto soloists, for example. So there are approximately 30% women in NASA. So there should be approximately 30% of the concerto soloists and master classes given by women. And I'm going to pass it over to Allison, who will talk a little bit more about some of the other issues that we're trying to address with our current initiatives. I bet she's...
Yes. Hi, everyone. So one initiative was mentioned by Carrie with regards to young women advancing beyond, advancing into serious, study of saxophone after high school, after public school, and then even further up the career ladder, a lack of women and gender minorities in academia in general. That number has not grown, I think, in over about 75 years, and it's dwindling, as a trend of hiring is narrowing in general in academia. So that number has remained too small in our opinion. And then finally, one issue that is near and dear to my heart is having NASA actually represent North America, all 3 countries. And so I'm going to start with plenty of other people's help, work towards branching out and having our membership reflect all of North America.
I don't understand, and so I'm going to start with.
So in general, at the beginning there, like Kim mentioned, there was just simply a lack of data, not just number-wise, but aspects of what was being portrayed online, pictures of women plus saxophonists, and there wasn't really even many at all photos that were collected of women in NASA in the photo collections. So these issues with not having data and now having data, we're able to collect these and think on them and show this in terms of what's being portrayed online and our resources online and things that we're really showing to the public, which I think is really important now that we're using our online spaces a lot more, that we're kind of stuck in confined to our homes. And so something that I've been working on a lot when I was a volunteer and now as a member of the committee is how this can be done and what initiatives we're doing to address this. So the data we've collected is really represented online and what we're all kind of looking at and working towards online. I've been working with a really awesome team of volunteers that really have really made this come to life. Alexia Perez is one of those, Mariah Goulet, who helped us design the website. And you've noticed everyone so far has really talked about the website. And the website is really a place to become a really great resource for everyone in a lot of different ways. We had 4 great photographers that were able to capture some really phenomenal pictures at our NASA conference this year that we will be able to now use in a variety of different ways that we'll be sharing throughout our time. And the development of the website, we hope to expand to give more resources to the community, such as a frequently asked questions page dealing with gender equity issues, mentoring resources, and beyond. So it's really going to be a hub for really a lot of the issues we're working towards addressing. I want to just briefly share my screen and show the website and some of the resources we already have online now that I can. Carrie mentioned the Community Engagement Project, which you can already read and learn more about now. Our mentoring program, which will soon be updated as we start to establish the next the next mentoring program this year. And there's also a Get Involved tab, which I think is really important that not a lot of you might not know about, and you can interact with this page quite a bit. There's a volunteer form. We use our volunteers quite a bit, especially in the area that I'm involved in, which is marketing. We have volunteers that help with the website, with our social media purposes for setting up this webinar series. There's also an area to submit feedback. If you think there's something that really the CSW could be working towards or adding to the list of our agenda, I'd really encourage you to fill out this feedback form. And in addition, you can reach out to us individually if you have questions or comments. So the website is really a great resource for us. It's for our community, and it's something that is pretty new, and this whole layout is really new, and was really done quite fantastically. So I encourage you to spend some time there. I'm now going to pass it off to Jonathan and Grace.
So the next question that we would like to address is the question, as a man, I have several women saxophone students. What are some better ways I can be, what are some ways I can be a better mentor towards them? And so I thought that we would start answering this by raising some concerns that your women saxophone students might have that you as a professor who is a man might not realize that they're having. And the first of these is the idea of gender blindness. So this is basically the idea that, oh, you know, I can treat all of my students equally and gender doesn't really impact the way that I teach them and the way they learn. And that can actually lead to some inadvertent problems because ignoring instances of inequity based on gender won't make them go away. And so it's better to address that inequity that might be happening rather than to let it persist. Because despite all of our best efforts, we all have implicit biases that might be reflected in our teaching practices. And so, for example, this can show up in our expectations of women plus students. So they can either be too high, that we expect more from our women than we do our men, or they can be too low. As well, this can show up in how leadership opportunities are distributed within a studio, what kinds of leadership opportunities and how many are given out to women students versus to male students of the same level in their degree. As well, this can happen in chamber music assignments. So are your women students being assigned generally to certain parts within your saxophone ensemble or to certain instruments in their quartet assignments? Additionally, beyond our own teaching practices, the studio environment can play a significant role in your mentorship of your women students. And one question to really consider is, how do students speak about and relate to one another in a gendered way? So for example, there have been instances of quartets designating a female member as the quartet mom, and that can really put a lot of undue pressure on that women member of that quartet. Additionally, students viewing the studio as a brotherhood or as having a bro culture can really be exclusionary for women students and can be difficult for them to navigate. And so this kind of reflects the importance of having a holistic view of your mentorship, that it's not just what goes on in lessons, but also about kind of their entire education and their experience with other students, particularly in a collegiate setting. And the through line for all of these concerns is that men are generally in a position where they don't have to think about how their gender impacts how they present themselves or how they are viewed in a saxophone setting. But women plus, however, are generally keenly aware of how their gender impacts their position in the studio and their identity as saxophonists. Jonathan, would I turn it off to you?
Muting, unmuting, and remuting. Feeling very mutable today. So yes, Grace, I want to echo a lot of what you said and carry that forward. You know, as Grace mentioned, a lot of men don't necessarily need to think about gender or don't think about gender in the same ways that women and non-binary people do. And this was certainly the case in my training, which I would say was probably in something of a gender blind way. There were always, I think in my time, in my undergraduate and my graduate degree, which were all at the same school, I think there were at maximum 3 women in my studio at any given time. And the assumption was that everybody would be treated equally in one way or another. And that was really the full extent of my training in gender. And at this point, like, I really see the paradox of being here on this committee and also being here in this position as an assistant professor, being asked to address this question without formal training or lived experience. I've definitely had to make a lot of adjustments in my 6 years as an assistant professor. Some of them I've made a lot of mistakes, and there were certainly enough mistakes over the years to make me feel woefully underqualified to contribute to this conversation. And at the same time, I think in further reflection, the main thing that we as men are asked to do is really to reflect and to grow through these things and to step up to the questions as they come up. So I'd like to take you through a few of my personal experiences in the academy as a professor. But before I do, I'd like to just throw out that if there's one takeaway I'd like you to consider from this part of the presentation is that gender does matter for all of us in many ways, that it's okay for men to think about this and really required, that it's okay for women and non-binary people to be in conversation with men about this, but also not to take on all the extra work of doing so at any given time. And if there's one question I'd like to submit for your consideration after the webinar is, how does gender matter to you in your teaching, in your mentorship, and also for your students? I think Grace mentioned a number of ways and really discussed a number of ways in which this really has a pretty significant impact on women students going through their undergraduate and graduate training programs. So there are many ways, as I mentioned, that I've faltered, shall we say, or found gender to come up in my teaching in my studio. 3 of those are in dress, how a person would dress for a concert of various kinds, for a competition, and the kinds of resistance that have come up in relation to that. Another area is bodies, especially around Me Too and in my own body as a relatively young male faculty member, and those kinds of relationships in the classroom. And also in the context of grading and repertoire assignments and technique assignments, which touches into what Grace was mentioning about implicit bias. And I found a lot of need to reflect on those things. So in the interest of time, I'll just walk through dress a little bit. I've noticed that people occasionally comment on other people's dress, but what I really notice is that this most in particular has affected my super high achieving female students, especially when they go out for competitions, or they do local competitions, or they do regional competitions, or they're in kind of a high pressure situation of one kind or another, which I think is quite interesting. And noting that really made me think about this quite a lot. Also made me think about this were 2 things that have gone wrong and 3 things maybe I've done a little better since. One thing that I've done wrong that maybe others can learn from is just ignoring the dress issue entirely. Because what I found is that the women students of mine that were experiencing this issue would actually experience it repeatedly. There might be someone on staff or on faculty who would constantly be on their case about the way that they looked in this concert, and then why isn't it changed for this concert, and why isn't it changed for this concert? Or it might be going to multiple different competitions and seeing different competition judges and receiving the same feedback about the way that they look, particularly hair, where it belongs, where it doesn't belong, how it should be, how it shouldn't be, all these kinds of things, which, I've in conversation with my students, I've noticed that is can be an extremely painful conversation or thing to receive piece of information that's not about performance, that's not about artistry, that's not about technique, but is really about appearance. Also, you know, another thing that and I think that also gets at attention that we have as faculty in terms of mentoring, is that part of, I think, the role of a mentor is to help socialize students towards the various environments that they might be encountering through your program. And so, you know, it's a delicate balance between people needing to make their own choices about their own bodies and also, you know, receiving this kind of feedback that keeps coming back as information and being able to work through that together in one way or another. Another classic and I think pretty horrendous mistake that I've made is referring students to talk about this with female faculty members without contacting that person in advance, without actually going to that person and taking them to lunch or paying them to talk to me about this issue. Instead just saying, well, you know, this person has won a lot of competitions, so if you'd really like to get the inside scoop, you should really talk to them about it, because I've never done this in a dress, you know, that kind of thing. And it's just not only does it create an undue burden for my colleagues, but it also really severely limits my own ability to learn about the situation and my own ability to help other students in the future. So that's been a mistake I have made and tried to learn from. There are three things that have gone better. One, I think I've started, well, certainly removing binary language in terms of gender from my syllabus, including around, I do have some dress guidelines, which are really more of like a where's Waldo for finding how you want to dress in various contexts. And I think that that's basically gone a little bit better to have more open guidelines in a syllabus rather than prescriptive ones. Another thing that I've more recently started doing and have very little experience with, but sort of is actually discussing and strategizing about dress for various different situations in different contexts, which is beyond my comfort zone, is making me stretch. And I think I have some issues maybe about some of the ways that I've tried that, but I also think that in a conversation, there's actually a dialogue and there's an ability to make mistakes and ability to kind of work through some of the questions that might be coming up. I've been Googling recital dresses with students to think about what different things might look like. And that's actually been kind of an enjoyable conversation, somewhat problematic, but I think fruitful. And I think, you know, the through line here is to, as a male faculty member, not to shy away from these kinds of discussions, and also to try to find ways to make it clear to all of your students that you value their input on these topics. This requires a good amount of reflection on all of our parts, and also to really make sure, I think it's important, at least it's been really important for me, to make sure that in my quest, especially as a young professor, to somehow be seen as an expert, to not shut down lines of communication coming back at me from my students. So we all want to be the best teachers we can be, and what is best for our students. It's really important, I think, to make gender equity a part of that reflection, which will help make us all better mentors and allies. I would refer you to a resource that Kim mentioned that I've been checking out lately, which is the Society for Music Theory has a committee on the status of women, and they have a resource page. So if you're interested in guidelines on language and other such things, they have some really nice resources in the meantime until we get ours set up. Which brings me to my last point, which is that we are starting an allyship project that's developing over the next 2 years. Of course, it's already started, but that's something that I'm going to be working on. The format of that is still to be determined, but if you have questions or suggestions or things that you'd like to see, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to hear from you and see if we can incorporate your thoughts and ideas into the project as it develops. So I think now I will pass it on to Connie.
Connie, I think your mic is on now.
There we go. I can finally hear you all. Thank you. I think I'd like to jump actually to the question of how to navigate playing in a quartet as the only female. It's a good segue after the discussion Grace and Jonathan started, which, by the way, was a really enlightening and interesting conversation that we had as a committee the other day. And what's also quite interesting about this is it doesn't only impact men to have some of these complicated conversations. And so, yeah, I think this would be a good time to move to that question. How do you navigate playing in quartet as the only female?
So I think, so this is a question that we got off of social media that somebody had sent in for us to respond to. And the kind of impression that I got from it was that it wasn't an overwhelmingly positive experience. And so that part of the how do you navigate it is how do you deal with the problems that you might be facing as the only woman in a quartet. So some of the kind of discussion that we had about this related to just how would you deal with a problem person, period. How would you handle that problem if the person was a woman? How would you handle that regardless of gender in that situation? Have you had conversations with all of your quartet mates about it? Is it a one-on-one problem, or is it something that the entire group is involved in? But kind of the thing that seemed most important and surprising to us sometimes is that how much of this our students try to take on themselves before coming to faculty and before coming to their coach, that it's okay and it's important to bring in your professor and to ask them to help. We talked about how women might be less inclined to ask for that assistance, but that generally as faculty, we want to provide that assistance regardless of who is experiencing those types of problems. Carrie actually talked a lot about how she likes to use the quartet as a microcosm for all human relationships. So I would like to invite her to talk a little bit about that, because I thought it was just so important.
Yeah, that's something I say at the beginning of every new quartet and try to repeat pretty regularly. And I think any of us that have coached or lived in a quartet for any length of time starts to feel like it's a family. And a lot of our students describe it as a family atmosphere. And because of that, I think every important thing that comes up in a family can also come up in a quartet. And of course, there are going to be conflicts. And so rather than view that as a negative, I like to use it as a vehicle to, oh, what a great opportunity to teach and learn some conflict resolution skills. And gender can definitely be part of that, just like it would in any other relationship, any other family. And I actually had a student come back once after they graduated and say, thank you for that quartet experience. My marriage is better because of it. So I think sometimes we learn, as we know, far beyond our relationship with a curved piece of metal. So yes, I agree. Ask for help, use basic conflict resolution skills. The other thing I say all the time is that my job every day, all day, is to teach people to listen, and that listening comes in all shapes and sizes and vehicles. And part of that is dealing with conflict resolution.
I think the most important thing is, as everyone has been talking about in all of the questions, is this idea of increasing or improving your communication skills, which transcends gender. It can impact gender, but the deeper you can go individually with becoming comfortable with standing up for yourself, putting your foot down when something's out of line, will go a long way. And it also can invite in the opportunities for other people to help you. And if that's one thing I've learned from years and years of quartet coaching, is that the sooner a quartet member, one of my students, comes to me with a problem, the sooner it will be resolved because we will help them resolve it. And oftentimes that means collecting the entire quartet in a room to talk through the problem. And I'm always surprised at how long quartets will go with dysfunction and harboring feelings that they can't somehow share with one another. It can really, really impact the productivity of the group too. So in all of this, we absolutely believe in communication first.
I just want to add that a lot of us on the committee, and I'm sure many watching, are currently in quartets and are the only female, whether that be as a student or in a professional setting. And I think it was something Grace mentioned when we were speaking a few days ago, but there's become this unfortunate saying of being a quartet mom, if you're the only female in the quartet, that then becomes an extension of being the studio mom, which I'm sure some female saxophonists can relate to that are probably current students. And this is something that might seem funny at first, but it's something that a studio teacher needs to be aware of, and finding ways to make sure they're aware of what's going on, because eventually this can lead to issues that extend into chamber music. And speaking from experience, and it hit home when Jonathan said when he was a student he probably had 2 or 3 female students in his studio, and this is kind of was really similar in my collegiate student experience. And I think the sooner you can get the studio teacher involved, even if it's these little sayings, the better. It might seem unnecessary or awkward, but a sense of awareness and getting the information out there is really important. And the studio teacher or close mentors maybe likely experience this, so establishing a good sense of community is really important.
Okay, so we will now address 2 questions that are similar in nature. One of them is, what are CSW's long-range goals for gender equity in saxophone? This was a spin off of a very deep question we were asked at the NASA presentation, which of course we don't have time to answer in depth, but if I could put it succinctly, CSW exists to empower as many people as possible, all genders, to become gender advocates and allies, so that the need for a conversation around gender equity is done, is complete, or at least significantly reduced. We look forward to the time in NASA that we don't have to be talking about some of the basic gender inequities. And if the movement over the past 2 years is any indication, we are thrilled by the level of support CSW has received by its membership in all kinds of ways. We're thrilled to know that the mentoring program has brought together a community. We're thrilled to know that we're starting the right conversations. And so it's our hope that within not too far into the future, we can talk less about the issues and more about the really strong initiatives that have been launched and will continue to exist within NASA. It's interesting to think about what challenges CSW has faced as a committee, not specifically so that we're talking necessarily about CSW, but whenever you start something new, it needs to be the right time. And that usually impacts how easy or challenging something can be. There's no question in our minds that the right time was 2 years ago, because of how quickly the momentum was generated around the organization of the CSW and the members and volunteers and all of that. But specific challenges that we faced, and I'm speaking definitely from my position as chair for the first 2 years and now co-chair. It's an interesting challenge, which is to harness and direct all of the intense energy that's come to us as a result of the start of this committee. There are too many ideas and too many people that want to get involved for the resources that we have right now. And that's a really hard thing to wrap your head around, because everyone is interested in doing good. And so that's definitely one of the challenges. We're not short on ideas as a committee. We're not short on volunteers who want to roll their sleeves up and become involved. We are short on resources. We're short on resources of time, of funding. We've had to build from the ground up. And some of the things I talked about in my opening remarks at NASA include that we had to build for the first 2 years. And we're really happy with what we've built in 2 years. But now that we're in the second term of the CSW, we're realizing even more and more how much more we have to build. And so that's a challenge, and it's a good problem to have. It really is. But what it comes down to is just the need for us to continue to effectively call on volunteers, delegate certain tasks, always remain a repository for ideas. And that's where the feedback comes into play. That's where the volunteer forums come into play. And then perhaps the last challenge before we then take questions from all of you, we were a new committee in NASA and the first of its kind to represent diversity. Whenever a diversity committee is established, there's going to be a lot of questions. There's going to be everything new. We had to write our bylaws, for instance. We had to write a mission statement. The executive committee now had to learn how to help us. The executive committee hasn't had to work with the diversity committee before. So everything was new. And that's been challenging. We've had to learn patience. We've had to learn understanding. And most of all, we've learned that no question is unanswerable. We have questions all the time. So many of our meetings are based in questions that we don't have the answers to. We will find out the answers, and we will do our best to bring on the right people to help answer questions. But in general, it's those are probably the biggest challenges. And I would rather have these challenges than anything else that exists. And now we just need to move forward and continue to build upon what we've started.
I'd add to that too, Connie, that the challenges presented, those challenges that are presented also present challenges for me on other committees, in that I've just never worked on such an effective committee that it makes it much more difficult for me to operate outside of this, because it just never seems to be as effective. So
yeah, we talk about that. It's been wonderful to work with a team of people from the beginning that have been so eager to contribute, workhorses, respectful, engaged, and willing to learn. Yeah, that's been the biggest takeaway of all of this, and that is why we can be where we are today.
So we don't have any questions in the Zoom chat yet, but I'm wondering if we could answer one that was sent to us ahead of time. And this is, what other organizations do you feel have been really successful in implementing a similar mission to CSW, and what elements of their success do you plan to utilize as well?
So I'll start on that one, since the mentoring program, in the restructuring of the mentoring program, we've taken a look at a lot of different mentoring programs and feel that the Luna Composition Lab mentoring program, which is now in its 4th year, has been, very, very successful in implementing a mentoring program for Women Plus. And, we've looked very closely at the sort of evolution of their mentoring program, the things that have changed from the first year to now. And it's become a really interesting one-on-one mentorship. It's a very personalized mentoring that offers not only professional development opportunities to the women that are involved. They get performance and professional opportunities, a trip to New York to work with professional performers and other composers, special master classes. It's a much more structured program. It's also much shorter, and they have it sort of sectioned off into quarters, really. There's a quarter that runs October, November, then another December to February, or cycles, they call it, and then one March to May. And they have very specific goals, very tangible results that are to be seen in each of these cycles, that then results in some kind of great experience, in all of them, but a big sort of cumulative thing at the end. And I think we're quite interested in looking at something like this for our mentoring program. So that was one that we were quite impressed with.
The other organization, and Jonathan mentioned this, that Committee on the Status of Women is loosely based on, is the Society for Music Theory. And that's, the Society for Music Theory kind of has it together in the committee arena. They have a committee on race. They have a committee on LGBTQ+. They have this committee on the status of women. They have more committees than you can imagine. But they're incredible advocates for inclusivity, just generally. They do run a mentoring program, and that was one of the things that we considered when we were very first starting the CSW. That's how our mentoring program was one of our very first initiatives, was just kind of based on the existence of that. They also offer a situational mentoring program, which is one of the things that I kind of hope will be on our agenda in the future. But yeah, so the Society for Music Theory, and I think someone put that in the Zoom chat, the link to their Committee on the Status of Women, because they do have some resources on their webpage.
We have another question. What are some ways undergraduates can get involved, and how can one apply for the mentorship program? I'll just jump in quickly and say one of the easiest ways anyone could get involved, I think especially for undergraduates, is the mentorship program. The other is you can submit a volunteer form that gets directly sent to us. You can briefly list your strengths. I know especially for the things that I do, we're always looking for volunteers, because those types of things get built up quite quickly with various social media like things, but filling out a volunteer form is one way to do so. Anyone have other things to add?
I'd like to add perhaps that before I speak too much about advocating for all 3 countries of North America, I'd like to hear from anyone interested in volunteering who's fluent in French and Spanish.
That's great. And I'll add on for the mentoring program, we will make sure to advertise very widely, not only on our social media channels and, of course, on our website, but also through NASA e-blasts when the mentorship program is ready to be applied for and how applications will be taken at that time. And as we mentioned before, we will also have mentoring opportunities for our entire NASA population that will be on gender specific issues or topics that people would like addressed as it relates to gender. But those will be advertised as well and available for anyone to partake in as they're scheduled.
I think I would like to share a couple of final thoughts about the challenges that exist in gender advocacy. One of the so if you don't look at gender specifically and you just say challenge of any advocacy, it's the need to convince others that there's a problem. And that's been a big part of our work in the last 2 years, is even if you are someone who considers yourself gender blind or you haven't run into any specific problems or seen any specific problems, they really do exist. And so a challenge with advocacy in general is just that you constantly have to be in a position to be prepared to share why it's important. Both advocacy and allyship are necessary to move a cause forward. Often is the case that if a specific problem doesn't touch you personally, then oftentimes you don't think about that problem. So, and that makes sense. But it doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. And so that's true in sexism and racism and environmentalism and anything else that there's a group championing a certain cause. And so with the work of CSW, we are relying upon membership to step up and become advocates and become allies. And this cannot all fall on the shoulders of the 8 committee members and the 10 volunteers that we have, because as we noted earlier, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of ideas, a lot of energy, and we can't get it all done ourselves. And so we're going to keep working as we've worked. And it's our hope that along the way, members will begin to feel empowered to become advocates and allies in their own communities. Our real hope is that we are providing resources and information on how to take this back into your own communities. NASA is just one community we belong to, but gender advocacy is needed in every setting you might belong to in music and elsewhere. So that's just a little bit more explanation of the deeper part of our work, in that we're not a committee that exists just to impact NASA.
Well, thanks to everyone for joining us today, both on Facebook and in this Zoom session. It's always great to have these conversations in a public forum, and I'm always thankful to present with these people. So thanks for joining us.
Okay, I don't think any more questions. All right, everybody. Thank you. You can count on us doing this again at some point, and good luck to everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah, stay well. Thanks, everyone.